There's a strange thing that happens when you live your life waiting for permission. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't announce itself. It's subtle, woven into the fabric of your daily choices, your hesitations, your second thoughts. You pause before speaking your truth because you're measuring how it will be received. You edit your dreams because you're wondering if they're acceptable to someone else. You shrink your ambitions, not because you lack capability, but because you're afraid of what people might think if you reach too high or fall too short. And here's what makes this trap so insidious: you believe you're being careful, thoughtful, considerate. You tell yourself you're just being realistic. But what you're actually doing is handing over the keys to your life, one small compromise at a time, to an audience that isn't even paying attention. The truth is this: the moment you stop chasing approval, the moment you release your grip on what others think of you, life doesn't just continue, it begins. It opens in ways you couldn't have predicted. Doors you didn't even know existed start to appear, not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped asking for permission to exist fully. And that changes everything. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to manage other people's perceptions of you. The careful words, the strategic silence, the performance of who you think you should be instead of the raw honesty of who you are. It's exhausting, isn't it? And the cruelest part is that no matter how perfectly you perform, no matter how carefully you curate yourself, you'll never control what others think. Their opinions shift like sand. What impresses them today bores them tomorrow. What offends one person delights another. You're chasing a target that doesn't exist, trying to win a game where the rules change every time you think you figured them out. Meanwhile, your real life, your actual existence, is waiting. It's been waiting this whole time for you to stop performing and start living. For you to stop seeking validation and start trusting yourself. The opportunities, the clarity, the freedom you've been searching for, they're not out there somewhere, contingent on someone else's approval. They're here, locked behind the door you've been afraid to open because you weren't sure if opening it was allowed. Most people spend their entire lives in this prison of permission. They die with their best ideas unspoken, their deepest truths unexpressed, their boldest moves unmade. Not because they lacked courage entirely, but because they were waiting for someone to tell them it was okay, waiting for consensus, waiting for approval. And it never comes, not in the way they hoped. So they wait longer. They compromise more. They make themselves smaller and quieter and more acceptable, believing that eventually, if they just get it right, the validation will arrive and they'll finally feel free to live. But that's not how it works. Freedom doesn't come from external permission. It comes from internal authority. It comes the moment you decide that your life is yours to live, that your choices are yours to make, that your path is yours to walk, regardless of whether anyone else understands it, approves of it, or even notices it at all. Let me tell you what's really happening when you seek approval. You're not just looking for encouragement or support. You're outsourcing your sense of worth. You're making other people the arbiters of your value, the judges of your decisions, the gatekeepers of your potential. Every time you check for their reaction before you act, you're giving them power over your life. And most of the time, they don't even want that power. They're too busy worrying about their own lives, their own insecurities, their own need for approval. So you're in this strange dance where everyone is looking to everyone else for permission, and no one feels free to just be themselves. It's a collective prison we've built together, reinforced every day by the belief that what other people think actually matters more than what we know to be true about ourselves. But it doesn't. Their opinions are just noise. Data points in a world full of conflicting perspectives. They don't define you. They never did. You've just been giving them that power because somewhere along the way, you learned to distrust yourself more than you trust them. This distrust didn't happen overnight. It was taught slowly, carefully, through 1,000 small moments where you were told, directly or indirectly, that your judgment wasn't enough, that you needed to check with someone else, that your instincts were unreliable, that fitting in mattered more than standing out, that being liked was more important than being honest. And you internalized these messages so deeply that you stopped noticing when you were censoring yourself. It became automatic, a reflex. You'd have an idea and immediately wonder if it was stupid. You'd feel something and immediately question if you were allowed to feel it. You'd want something and immediately worry if wanting it made you selfish or unrealistic or difficult. Layer by layer, year by year, you built this internal committee of other people's voices, and you started checking with them before you did anything significant, before you made a career change, before you ended a relationship that wasn't working, before you spoke up in a meeting, before you pursued something that excited you but seemed unconventional. You became so skilled at predicting what others might think that you forgot how to ask yourself what you actually wanted. And here's the thing about living this way. It doesn't just limit your choices. It limits your vision. When you're constantly orienting yourself around other people's expectations, you can only see the paths they've already approved, the safe routes, the conventional options, the choices that won't raise eyebrows or invite criticism. But the most interesting opportunities, the ones that actually align with who you are and what you're capable of, they exist outside that narrow corridor of acceptability. They require you to deviate, to take risks that look foolish to people who don't understand your vision, to make moves that won't make sense until years later when the results speak for themselves. But you can't take those moves if you're waiting for approval, because approval only comes after success, never before it. Before success, there's only uncertainty. And if you need certainty from others before you act, you'll never act. You'll spend your life watching other people do the things you were afraid to try, wondering what might have been if you'd just trusted yourself enough to begin. The fear of disapproval is really a fear of isolation. We're wired to want connection, to belong, to be part of the tribe, and that wiring runs deep. For most of human history, being cast out meant death. So we learned to read the room, to adjust our behavior, to avoid doing anything that might get us rejected. That instinct served us well when survival depended on staying in the group's good graces. But we're not living in that world anymore. You won't die if someone disagrees with you. You won't perish if people think you're strange or difficult or too much. The stakes have changed, but the fear hasn't. It's still operating as if rejection equals extinction. And that outdated fear is running your life, keeping you small, keeping you safe, keeping you stuck. Because as long as you believe that other people's opinions determine your survival, you'll never risk disappointing them. You'll never step out of line. You'll never discover what you're actually capable of when you stop performing for an audience and start living for yourself. But here's what happens when you let go of that fear. When you stop caring what people think, not in an arrogant or dismissive way, but in a grounded, self-assured way. When you recognize that their opinions are just their opinions, shaped by their experiences, their fears, their limitations, and they have nothing to do with your truth or your potential. When you reach that point, something shifts. You start making decisions faster. You stop second-guessing yourself constantly. You trust your instincts because you're not drowning them out with the noise of what everyone else might think. You speak more honestly because you're not editing yourself for palatability. You pursue opportunities that genuinely interest you instead of the ones that look good on paper. You walk away from situations that drain you without needing to justify your choice to anyone. You become more authentic, not because you're trying to be authentic, but because you're no longer trying to be anything other than yourself. And that authenticity, that alignment between who you are and how you show up in the world, it creates a kind of clarity and momentum that's impossible to access when you're living for approval. I've watched people transform when they make this shift, not in dramatic overnight ways, but in quiet, profound ways that ripple through every area of their lives. There was a woman who spent 15 years in a career she never wanted because her parents had sacrificed to put her through school, and she felt obligated to stay the course. She was good at the work, competent, reliable, but she was dying inside. Every day felt like she was wearing someone else's clothes. She'd lie awake at night thinking about what she really wanted to do, but the thought of disappointing her family paralyzed her. Until one day, she realized something simple but revolutionary. They would be disappointed either way. If she stayed in the career, she'd be miserable, and they'd sense it. If she left, they'd be upset initially, but at least she'd have a chance at happiness. Either way, their disappointment was a possibility, so she might as well choose the path that gave her a chance at fulfillment. She left the career, she retrained. She started over in a field that actually excited her. And yes, her family struggled with it at first. But within a year, they saw the change in her, the lightness, the passion, the aliveness that had been missing for so long. And they came around, not because she convinced them she'd made the right choice, but because the evidence of her well-being was undeniable. She'd stopped seeking their approval and started trusting her own compass. And in doing so, she showed them something they'd never seen before, who she actually was when she wasn't trying to be, who they wanted her to be. Then there was a man who had a business idea that everyone told him was too risky. Friends, colleagues, even his partner urged him to play it safe, to wait to do more research, to test the waters more cautiously. And for months he listened, he delayed, he second-guessed, until he realized that all the advice he was getting, while well-intentioned, was coming from people who'd never taken a risk like the one he was contemplating. They were projecting their fears onto him. Their caution wasn't wisdom. It was just fear dressed up as practicality. So he stopped asking for opinions. He stopped explaining his vision to people who couldn't see it. He moved forward with quiet determination, knowing the only validation that mattered was whether the idea worked, not whether people approved of him trying it. The business struggled at first, as most do. There were moments when he doubted himself, when he wondered if the skeptics had been right. But he pushed through those moments because he wasn't carrying the additional weight of their disapproval. He'd already released that. He'd already decided that his judgment was the only one that mattered in this decision. And eventually the business found its footing. It grew. It succeeded beyond what he'd initially imagined. And the same people who'd cautioned him against it were now congratulating him on his courage and vision. But he knew the truth. His courage hadn't come from their eventual approval. It had come from his willingness to act without it. These stories share a common thread. The breakthrough didn't come from gaining approval. It came from releasing the need for it. That release is the key. It's not about becoming indifferent to people or dismissing feedback or acting recklessly without consideration. It's about recognizing that the final authority in your life has to be you. Other people can offer perspectives, share experiences, provide information, but they can't tell you what's right for you. They don't live in your skin. They don't carry your unique combination of talents, desires, circumstances, and vision. They see a fraction of who you are, and they interpret that fraction through the lens of their own lives. Their advice, their opinions, their judgments, they're always incomplete because they're missing the most important day-to-day, your internal knowing. That quiet voice inside you that understands things your rational mind hasn't figured out yet. That intuition that points you toward opportunities before they're obvious and away from situations before they turn toxic. You've been taught to distrust that voice, to override it with logic and consensus and external validation. But that voice is the only truly reliable guide you have. It's connected to something deeper than approval. It's connected to truth. Learning to trust yourself is not a one-time decision. It's a practice. A daily choice to honor your own perception, even when it conflicts with what others think, especially when it conflicts. Because that conflict is where growth happens. That's where you learn to stand firm in your knowing without needing everyone else to agree with you. At first, it feels terrifying. You make a choice based on your own judgment, and immediately the doubts flood in. What if you're wrong? What if people think you're foolish? What if you fail and everyone sees it? These thoughts are normal. They're the residue of all those years spent seeking approval. But if you push through them, if you sit with the discomfort and keep moving forward anyway, something remarkable happens. You discover that you can survive other people's disapproval. You can tolerate their confusion, their criticism, their concern. And not only can you survive it, but you can thrive in spite of it, because you're no longer leaking energy into managing their perceptions. All that energy is now available for the actual work of living your life, for executing your ideas, for building your vision, for becoming who you're meant to be. Self-trust is built through small acts of integrity. Every time you honor your own judgment over someone else's opinion, you strengthen that muscle. Every time you speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, you deepen that trust. Every time you make a decision that feels right to you, even if it looks wrong to others, you're reinforcing the idea that you are capable of navigating your own life. And over time, this accumulation of small choices creates a foundation of confidence that's unshakable, because it's not based on external validation. It's not dependent on people agreeing with you or applauding your choices. It's rooted in something more fundamental, your direct experience of being able to trust yourself and survive the consequences. You've made choices. Some worked out beautifully. Some didn't go as planned. But you learned from all of them. You adjusted. You grew. You kept moving forward. And through that process, you proved to yourself that you don't need other people's approval to navigate life. You just need your own commitment to learning, adapting, and staying true to what matters to you. This doesn't mean you become closed off to input or feedback. It means you become discerning about what input you let influence you. There's a difference between considering someone's perspective and outsourcing your decision-making to them. When you're grounded in self-trust, you can listen to advice without feeling obligated to follow it. You can hear criticism without internalizing it as proof of your inadequacy. You can receive praise without becoming dependent on it for your sense of worth. You maintain your center. Your internal compass stays oriented toward your own truth, and external voices become just that, external. Interesting data points, perhaps, but not determinative, not authoritative, not more important than what you know about yourself and your situation. The people who live this way have a quality about them. You can feel it when you're around them. They're calm, undefended. They don't need to convince you of anything. They're not performing or posturing. They're just present, fully themselves, without apology or explanation. And paradoxically, this lack of neediness makes them more magnetic, not less, because people are drawn to authenticity. We're tired of performance. We're exhausted by the constant pretense that everyone maintains. So when we encounter someone who's just genuinely themselves, who's not trying to impress us or win our approval, it's refreshing. It's rare. And it gives us permission, even if just for a moment, to consider that we might be able to drop our own performance too. But to get to that place, you have to be willing to disappoint people. This is the price of self-trust. Not everyone will understand your choices. Not everyone will support your path. Some people will be genuinely confused by your decisions. Others will be threatened by them, especially if your growth highlights their stagnation. Some will try to pull you back into old patterns because your evolution disrupts the dynamic they were comfortable with. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be willing to let them be confused, threatened, uncomfortable. Their discomfort is not your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to live your life with integrity, to make choices that align with your values and your vision, to honor your own knowing even when it's inconvenient for others. This doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sovereign. It makes you an adult taking full responsibility for your existence instead of remaining a child waiting for permission. The shift from approval seeking to self-trust is fundamentally a shift in power. You stop giving your power away. You stop making other people the authors of your story. You reclaim the pen. And at first, that feels heavy, because with power comes responsibility. You can no longer blame anyone else if things don't work out. You can't hide behind, "I was just doing what they said," or I didn't want to disappoint them. You're the one making the calls now. You're accountable. But that weight, that responsibility, it's also freedom. Because if you're the one making the choices, you're also the one who can change them. You're not stuck waiting for someone else to give you permission to pivot or to try something new or to walk away from what's not working. You can just do it. You can make the decision and move. And that agency, that capacity to direct your own life, it's worth infinitely more than the temporary comfort of having someone else's approval. There's a moment in this transition that feels like free fall. You've released your grip on external validation, but you haven't fully landed in self-trust yet. You're suspended between two ways of being. The old way, where you knew the rules and played by them even though they constrained you. And the new way, where the only rule is integrity to yourself, which feels simultaneously liberating and terrifying because there's no script. No one to tell you if you're doing it right. That moment is where most people turn back. They reach for approval again because the uncertainty is too much. They'd rather have the comfort of external validation, even if it means staying small, than endure the discomfort of trusting themselves without a safety net. But if you can sit with that free fall, if you can tolerate the uncertainty long enough to let your internal compass recalibrate, something beautiful happens. You start to feel solid ground beneath you, not the false ground of other people's approval, which shifts constantly, but real ground, your own foundation, built on self-knowledge, self-respect, and self-trust. And once you feel that ground, once you know it's there and it's real and it's yours, you'll never want to go back to the old way. Because you'll have tasted freedom. And freedom, real freedom, is addictive in the best possible way. This freedom manifests in unexpected ways. You'll notice it in small moments first. You'll speak up in a meeting without rehearsing your words 3 times in your head. You'll wear something you like without wondering if it's appropriate. You'll make plans that excite you without checking if they're impressive to anyone else. You'll end a conversation that's draining your energy without needing a socially acceptable excuse. These small acts of sovereignty accumulate. They build momentum. And before long, you're making bigger moves with the same ease. You're changing careers without needing everyone's blessing. You're ending relationships that don't serve you without needing to justify your choice. You're starting projects that matter to you without needing assurance they'll succeed. You're living from the inside out instead of the outside in. And the life that emerges from this inside-out orientation, it looks different than the one you were building when you were seeking approval. It's messier in some ways, less conventional, harder to explain to people who are still trapped in the old paradigm. But it's yours, genuinely, authentically yours. And that ownership, that full authorship of your life, it brings a satisfaction that external validation could never provide. People often ask if this means you stop caring about anyone else, if freedom from approval leads to selfishness or isolation. And the answer is no, actually the opposite. When you stop seeking approval, you become capable of genuine connection, because you're no longer relating to people through the lens of what you can get from them. You're not performing for them or managing their perception of you. You're just present. And from that presence, you can actually see them. Not as judges or validators, but as human beings with their own struggles, their own journeys, their own need to be seen and accepted. You become more compassionate, not less, because you're no longer threatened by their differences or their judgments. You can let them be who they are while you remain who you are. And that creates space for real relationship, for honest exchange, for mutual respect without the undercurrent of neediness that poisons so many interactions. The people who matter, the ones who are genuinely aligned with you, they'll appreciate this shift. They'll feel the difference. They'll relax around you because you're not asking them to validate you anymore. You're just offering your authentic presence, and that's a gift. The opportunities that open when you stop chasing approval are not the ones you were chasing before. They're different, often better, more aligned with who you actually are. Because when you're approval seeking, You're pursuing opportunities that look good to others. The prestigious job, the impressive credential, the relationship that checks all the boxes. But when you release that need, when you start trusting yourself, you begin to notice different opportunities, the ones that genuinely excite you even if they don't make sense on paper, the projects that align with your values, even if they won't impress your network, the paths that feel right in your gut, even if they're unconventional. And these opportunities, because they're genuinely aligned with you, they tend to work out better, not because you're luckier, but because you're bringing your full energy to them. You're not divided. You're not performing. You're actually engaged in the work because it matters to you, not because you're trying to prove something to someone else. And that full engagement, that undivided attention and authentic enthusiasm, it produces results that effortful striving never could. This is the quiet power that comes from living without the need for external validation. You're not louder or more aggressive. You're not trying to dominate or control. You're just clear, focused, aligned. You know what matters to you, and you move toward it without hesitation or apology. And that clarity, that certainty, it has its own force. It cuts through noise. It attracts opportunities. It commands respect in a way that approval-seeking never does, because people sense the difference between someone who's performing for validation and someone who's simply being themselves with full conviction. The former is exhausting to be around. The latter is compelling. Not because they're trying to be compelling, but because their authenticity creates its own gravitational pull. They're not chasing anything. They're not proving anything. They're just living fully, and that fullness is what draws people and opportunities toward them. Living this way requires courage, but not the loud, dramatic kind. It's a quiet courage, the courage to sit with uncertainty, the courage to disappoint people, the courage to trust yourself when no one else does, the courage to keep moving forward even when you can't see the whole path. This courage isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you build. One choice at a time, one moment of self-trust at a time. Every time you honor your own judgment over someone else's opinion, you're exercising courage. Every time you speak your truth despite the potential consequences, you're building courage. Every time you make a decision based on what feels right to you rather than what looks good to others, you're strengthening that capacity. And over time, what once felt impossibly brave becomes normal, becomes your baseline. You forget that you used to be afraid of these things. You forget that you used to need permission, because living from self-trust becomes so natural that you can't imagine doing it any other way. The people who never make this shift, they reach the end of their lives with a particular kind of regret. Not the regret of failure or loss, but the regret of unlived life, of potential unrealized, of truths unspoken, of paths not taken because they were too busy seeking approval to risk the disapproval that comes with authenticity. They look back and see all the moments they censored themselves, held back, played small, and they wonder what might have been if they'd just trusted themselves enough to try, if they'd been willing to let some people be disappointed in order to honor what was true for them. That regret is heavier than any temporary discomfort you might feel when you choose self-trust over approval, because that discomfort passes. People adjust. New equilibriums form. But regret, the regret of a life lived for others instead of yourself, that doesn't pass. It accumulates. It becomes the dominant note of your final years. And there's no going back to correct it. So the question becomes, what are you waiting for? What permission are you still seeking? Who do you think needs to validate your choices before you can make them? And what would happen if you just stopped waiting? If you made the move, spoke the truth, took the risk, without checking to see if anyone approved first, the world wouldn't end. You wouldn't be cast out. The catastrophe you're imagining, the one that keeps you frozen, it wouldn't materialize. What would happen instead is simpler and more profound. You'd discover that you're capable, that you can trust yourself, that your judgment, while imperfect, is sufficient to navigate your life. And that discovery, that direct experience of your own capability, it would change everything. Not overnight, not in some dramatic conversion, but gradually, steadily, like a plant growing toward light. You'd start orienting toward your own truth instead of other people's opinions, and your life would begin to open. The opening doesn't look the same for everyone. For some, it's a complete reinvention, a new career, a new location, a completely different way of structuring their days. For others, it's subtler. The external circumstances might stay mostly the same, but the internal experience shifts entirely. They're doing the same work, seeing the same people, living in the same place, but they're doing it from a different center, from self-trust instead of approval-seeking. And that shift in orientation changes the quality of everything. The work feels different when you're doing it because you choose it, not because you're trying to prove something. Relationships feel different when you're showing up as yourself rather than performing a version of yourself you think the other person wants. Even ordinary moments have a different texture when you're not constantly monitoring for approval and adjusting your behavior accordingly. You're just present, just alive, just yourself. And that simple presence, that undefended authenticity, it's the freedom you've been searching for all along. This freedom isn't the absence of care. It's not apathy or detachment or isolation. It's something more nuanced. It's the freedom to care deeply about things that matter to you without needing those things to matter to anyone else. To pursue your vision without requiring consensus. To love people without needing them to validate your worth. To make your contribution without seeking recognition. To live your values without needing society's applause. This freedom is available to you right now, not someday when you're more confident or more established or more certain. Right now, in this moment, you can choose to stop seeking approval. You can choose to trust yourself. You can choose to honor your own knowing, even if it makes no sense to anyone else. And that choice, simple as it sounds, will begin to change everything. Because life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't wait for you to have permission. It's happening now, and it opens to those who are willing to participate fully, without the safety net of external validation, without the comfort of knowing everyone approves. It opens to those who are brave enough to live from their own center, to trust their own compass, to walk their own path, even when that path leads somewhere unexpected and unapproved. That's where life is, not in the safe corridor of consensus, but in the wild terrain beyond it, where you have to trust yourself, because no one else can see what you see. Where you have to act on your own authority, because no one else is going to give you permission. Where you have to live with the consequences of your choices, but also with the profound satisfaction of knowing they were actually your choices, chosen freely, acted upon courageously, without apology, without explanation, without the need for anyone's approval but your own.